From presenting a false version of Regency-era Britain, to fans calling the show's black representation downright shallow. Does Queen Charlotte have a cultural appropriation issue? Let's find out. Fans fell in love with Bridgerton because of the show's portrayal of diversity. Right from the get-go, the audience was introduced to characters like Lady Danbury, the Duke of Hastings, and, of course, Her Majesty Queen Charlotte, all of whom were people of color. And honestly, it was a pretty refreshing take on period dramas. But some people weren't too thrilled. Why? Well, because at the end of the day, it's just not factually accurate. And the noise has only gotten louder after the premiere of Queen Charlotte, A Bridgerton Story. Now, the spin-off is based on the life of Queen Charlotte, portrayed by the gorgeous Golda Rosheuvel in Bridgerton seasons 1 and 2. And since it takes us through the very early days of the Queen's life and her marriage to the King, India Amartifio takes on the role of a younger Charlotte. The story begins with her marriage to the enigmatic King George III, played by Corey Milcreast with all his youthful charm, while James Fleet gracefully assumes the mantle of wisdom in his later years. But this is no ordinary marriage. No, this is the epic-defining event known as the Great Experiment. To give you some context, in the realms of Bridgerton, this experiment represents the very fictional decision of the monarchy to fully integrate Black people and other people of color into society, even within the noble class, as a direct consequence of Charlotte and George's marriage. But despite the fairy tale-like nature of the story, the portrayal of Queen Charlotte as a Black woman holds a lot of importance. You see, Netflix and Shondaland have started a whole new debate with the release of this spin-off, forcing people to wonder, was the Queen really a woman of color? Now, the answer to this is a little complicated. Some accounts and portraits depicted the Queen with fair skin and European features, while others hinted at slightly darker skin and African features. And for those of you who have watched the show, you would know that the writers definitely hinted at this controversy when George's mother asked the royal portrait maker to paint Charlotte's skin a lighter color. In the real world, Queen Charlotte has been deemed ugly and plain, making some people believe that people thought this of her simply because she was a woman of color. As far as the proof of her actual heritage goes, some say that she was descended from the illegitimate son of King Alfonso of Portugal and his Moorish mistress. Now, for those of you who don't know, back in the day, the term Moor was used to refer to anyone with dark skin. But as far as Charlotte is concerned, King Alfonso was actually born 600 years before the Queen, so that theory goes down the drain. Not just that, but historians believe that the term Moor itself had a bunch of meanings. Originally, it meant the Muslim inhabitants of the Maghreb, the Iberian Peninsula, Sicily, and Malta during the Middle Ages. Then, it was also used for people with dark skin, but it would sometimes also refer to people who would be considered European, Middle Eastern, South Asian, or even Latino today. So, do you see where it all gets confusing? Even with all this uncertainty, though, some people are staunch believers in Queen Charlotte's blackness, which is why they have a huge problem with the way the show has dealt with the question of race. See, the thing is that even with all the praise that Shonda Rhimes has received for Bridgerton, there's one thing that no one can wrap their heads around, which is that instead of either creating a completely fantastical world or adapting the story in a respectful way, the first season just goes ahead and gives us a Regency-era Britain with a multiracial cast, and the implication that the interracial marriage between a queen and a king just ended racism. Some fans thought that this explanation was just way too convenient, especially considering all the politics that surrounded Queen Charlotte's actual heritage. So, the spin-off was kind of Shondaland's answer to all the criticism, and an honest attempt at explaining how it all actually came about. But while the show does lean into representational politics, it's a little hard for the fans to feel good about how shallow it all feels at times. I mean, first you have that super controversial intimate scene with Simon and Daphne, and then you spend about 3 episodes watching Lady Danbury, another character of color, being assaulted by her husband after learning that she was forced to marry him as a child. And it's safe to say that the fans are not having it. What's the point of showing all these black characters if you're barely giving them any agency and subjecting them to the worst trauma ever? Not to mention the fact that the actual history of racism in Regency-era England wasn't all sunshine and rainbows like the show has portrayed it to be. See, Princess Augusta only pushes for the great experiment because she wants George to get married, without anyone finding out about his illness. And okay, sure, there are a number of problems that accompany the great experiment, such as the crown not knowing what to do when Lord Danbury dies, and the question of the inheritance of his title being left up in the air. Then, you also have characters like Lady Vivian Ledger, who are just not okay with accepting their counterparts of color so quickly. What's the problem then, you ask? Well, only the fact that Queen Charlotte tries to make you believe that all of these problems can be solved within seconds. Charlotte and George arrive at the Danbury Ball, and suddenly everyone is okay with mingling with each other. It sounds great, but only in theory. And for people of color who are still fighting the battle to be fully accepted by society, it was kind of like a slap in the face. The problem runs way deeper than just that, though. It's the fact that Queen Charlotte might have been of African heritage, but in real life, this alleged background did nothing to improve the lives of Black people living in England or its colonies. And speaking of the colonies, the total absence of any mention of slavery in the Bridgerton world is also pretty obvious. In fact, none of the Black members of the ton really care about human rights. All they want to do is host balls, be part of gentlemen's clubs, and get invited to hunts. They're more concerned with their own land, wealth, and noble titles. Now, I know that this is a fictional world. The spin-off itself has a disclaimer in the beginning, where you hear Lady Whistledown's voice saying that the story isn't based on facts. But honestly, some fans wonder why there isn't more to this representation. After all, in the time period of the Queen, there was a heightened discussion around slavery, with the British Empire struggling to squash down slave revolts in all the colonies. And while Queen Charlotte could have been the perfect opportunity for the Bridgerton universe to shed light on these topics, even if they did change the story to give everyone a happy ending, it's just a little sad that the show chose not to talk about it at all. Sure, we all loved Charlotte and George's love story, but the fact that the entire thing is so removed from history is leading people to believe that Shonda is trying to whitewash the actual history of Britain. And that's obviously not sitting well with anyone. It's even starting an entire debate on whether Bridgerton is all that progressive. According to Carolyn Hines of The Observer, the character's race is practically ignored when it comes to the narrative. She pointed out how most of the speaking roles belong to the white actors in the main show. And while the spin-off does give Charlotte her moment to shine, for some reason, most of the Black characters are given some seriously negative storylines, putting them at constant odds with the white characters. I mean, that's what Lady Danbury's entire arc was all about, wasn't it? And honestly, it makes you wonder, could they really not have told her story without all the abuse and cheating that painted her in a negative light? All in all, the history of Britain is rich and complicated at the same time, and reducing it to the idea that two people's love story saved the world feels a little wrong. And hey, don't forget that even Julia Quinn's novels, the very same ones that the show is based on, feature absolutely zero Black characters. Why? Well, because the author claims that she wanted to tell happy stories, and that having Black characters in the narrative would mean she'd have to take a very different route of storytelling. But I guess she changed her mind when it came to the writing on the show. So, from the fans questioning the representation on the show, to presenting a false version of Regency-era Britain. This was all on Queen Charlotte possibly having a cultural appropriation issue.